Welcome to another interview on HR Masters Wine and Wisdom. I'm Michelle Synegal of Management Dynamics. My partner in crime is Jody Friend. Jody, would you wave and say hi? And we have, thank you. We have two wonderful guests today, you all. They are Claire Tse, an intercultural intelligence and diversity, equity, and inclusion strategist, and she's the principal of Tse Solutions. And I happen to know Claire very well. We've worked together for over 20 years and for about 8 years weekly. So we got to know each other on a personal level. And then my other esteemed guest is Masando Hiraoka, who I've known for at least a decade. And we too are partners in crime. And what is that crime? That crime is mitigating racism. And it's both of our life's work. Masando heads up a ministry for one of the largest centers for spiritual living in our country. It's in Denver area, Mile High Church. And so his responsibility is racial equity and social justice. And he served on the Diversity Inclusion Commission for a number of years. And so we know each other very well as well. So with that, we're going to just open up with questions and have a wonderful, wonderful conversation. And we're going to inform people. That's what this is about. It's about informing and enlightening people. We want to move people from being bystanders to being active allies. So with that said, I just want to start out on a personal note and ask you, we'll start with Claire and then you, Masando, ladies first. That's the only reason I'm doing that. And I'd like to ask you just, based on what's been going on in our country, the recent crimes directed towards Asian Americans in our country. A lot of people think that it happened very recently in Atlanta, Georgia area, but it's been going on for a very, very long time. And it's been highlighted, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd like to start with you, Claire, on a personal note. Just how are you feeling? What's coming up for you?
I mean, it's very difficult to look in the mirror and say, I could be a target. And quite honestly, I am very happy that my parents are no longer alive, because they were immigrants, and they came into the country from Malaysia and Hong Kong. They thought this was the best country to raise a family, so they were naturalized citizens. And we're taking a look at this, and you look at the history. Like you said, I appreciate the fact that you and Jody are really taking a look at this this topic, because this goes back to the the 1600s and 1800s. That's the first time that the U.S. government said that the Chinese Exclusion Act. And then in the 40s, you have the Japanese internment camps where my friend Ann Kuzumoto is actually a survivor of that, when her family was ripped out of California and put into tents in Alabama. And the Vincent Chen situation, with his murder and with no perpetrators. You take a look at all the things that are going on historically, as well as me personally. I appreciate you asking that, because my first language is Cantonese. I had to learn, because I'm the offspring of 2 immigrants, and I had to learn English, even though I was born and raised in New York, to go to school. And I still get, here it's 2021, we still talking about, go back to your country. It's like, well, I'm from New York. Where'd you learn English? I'm from New York, because I'm the constant, the perpetual foreigner. Yes. And it's like, it's the kind of thing where you just, the model minority is killing us, honestly, because it really pits, the different groups that are identified as minorities, against the Asian population. Yeah. And, so, I mean, it's one of those things where I really think about going out at night. I talk to clients that are really scared of even leaving their homes in New York City, my hometown. And it's heartbreaking, because, because a lot of Asian Americans, we were there. I was there too, Black Lives Matter. We're out on the streets, we're, really trying to change the system. And then when these attacks are coming, the question is it race-based that a white man sat outside of the spa and then waited for people to go in to shoot him and he had a bad day? I mean, when was the last time that we as people of color and BIPOC individuals could have a bad day? We eat ice cream. We don't go shoot people. So that's part of the the anguish, quite honestly, and the anger, and not to let it eat me up. So thank you for asking.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for your candid response. Masando, same question.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, it's heavy, right? Like it's heavy to look in the mirror and know that like we're still being viewed in a particular way. Like I'm 5th generation, I'm a Gosei, right? I'm 5th generation Japanese American. So on one side and then 4th on the other side, right? So like my family's been here for a while. And still like when you read the headlines, like the word xenophobia comes up a lot and I'm like, oh yeah, like that's still how I'm seen. Like, like that's still how I'm seen. And this is about racism and xenophobia, but part of the model minority myth and just part of what it means to be Asian in the US is to be seen as a perpetual foreigner. And I think what the Atlanta shootings brought up is, xenophobia, the fetishization of Asian women, right? Like these things are the model minority myth, like these are dehumanizing, right? They strip our humanity, right? And so I think it's just been heavy. I didn't sleep after those Atlanta shootings. I was not sleeping well at all. And while I don't know if I have felt personally less safe, or maybe I just like I'm not thinking about it when I'm going about and doing errands and stuff because I just don't want to. But I know that like my family members are, right? And I know like they're more hesitant to travel to some of the cities that have gotten more publicity around some of these, anti-Asian hate crimes. And it's hard too because like so many of these hate crimes go, they're not reported. And then even if they are reported as such, it is so hard for a hate crime to even be, actually prosecuted, right? Like to prove that this was motivated by race is so difficult in the courts. So like often it just like doesn't happen, right? You see these cases that are coming and it's like, well, it's not going to be tried as a hate crime. And it's just hard because then this conversation around it being racially motivated gets muddied, right? So personally how I'm feeling, I guess it's mixed, right? Because it's been feeling heavy. I've been feeling sad. I've been feeling scared for my family members, especially the elders in my family. But something that has been heartening, right, is seeing, well, one, the solidarity between the BIPOC communities, right? Like, so, okay, the very first people to reach out after Atlanta, like the day or the day after, right? They all happen to be like my Black and brown friends, right? Like, and then when you look out, like those communities were the first ones to start speaking and to show solidarity, right? Like my social media feed was like the leaders in this conversation, right? We're the folks that already come from like historically oppressed communities, because there was an inherent understanding of what this feels like. And I think there was an inherent understanding of what silence also feels like. Yes. And I think that's something that hit me hard. I was like, oh yeah, like I could feel the silence from my white friends, right? Because it wasn't even in their consciousness as acutely. And so it was also this motivation of like, God, I have a deeper understanding than I think I did before about what that kind of silence feels like. And I want to internalize that enough so that like, I'm not silent, even though part of my culture is like, don't rock the boat, right? Like there's even a like a saying that says like the tallest nail gets hit, right? Yeah. Like that's part of the culture, right? And I'm seeing all these Asian folks that are saying, like, we can't do that anymore. We can't do that anymore for our own community, and we can't do that anymore for, other communities of color. And so that is something that is actually really heartening. Yeah, something I'm actually really excited about, that's happening more.
Yeah, I
Um,
appreciate you bringing that up because that makes total sense.
Right?
I'm
Yeah.
glad there's good
Yeah.
somewhere,
Yeah.
even if that silver lining is oh so thin. Yes. Jody, did you want to pose a question?
I did because I'm going to just be very transparent because I've never heard the term model minority before.
Oh.
Okay. So can you just educate me? Like, where did that term come from? Um, I mean, I'm really interested to know because it's I've never heard that term.
Yeah, and it's a myth, by the way.
Yeah, I always encourage people, if they're going to use the term
Yeah.
model minority, say model minority myth.
Myth.
Right,
Always
right.
has to have
So,
myth.
absolutely. So, like, what I guess where did it sort of start? And and it's still being obviously perpetuated, today.
Claire, you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, as far as is coined in I think in the 70s, 80s, and it was really pitting the Asians because, as Masago was saying, it's like you have the, supposed to keep your head down, work really hard, and then don't speak up. Don't say it out of the family. Don't even speak about it in the family. Just endeavor on. And so we're like the model minority because we're quiet, we work hard, we do everything that we're supposed to do. The assumption and the myth is that that we accumulate a lot of wealth, and because we're highly educated, because we have tiger moms that are really pushing us to get into, I mean, all these stereotypes have really hurt us because a couple people, and then of course now you have these recent shows that's like, okay, Crazy Rich Asians, the book that turned into a movie, and then you have Bling Dynasty. Everyone thinks, oh, Asians are really rich. We are the highest poverty, especially around our elders, is as around us, from a socioeconomic standpoint. And also, part of that too is that start thinking about how, as the model minority, it's like, this is the standard. It's like, that's not the standard. And, we are waking up saying, wait a minute, we've given up everything and we're still not considered management material because we're quiet. We're waiting for people to finish their sentences. And, what happens when you get into a meeting and people are finishing each other's sentences, you're trying to be polite. It's interpreted as the model minority. It's like, yeah, they're good little workers, but not leaders. And it's like, look at the rest of the world. Who are the leaders? And also who are the leaders of the bigger corporations? So thank you for that question.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that knowledge with us today. I really do appreciate that.
Yeah, it was a setup from the beginning, right? Because like the term itself and just like the idea of a model minority, is, I think, like historically there was like an article and maybe the New Yorker or something that came out around the model minority myth, and really it was the whole sort of purpose of this, what I would actually call it like propaganda, was to like it was politically motivated as a way to block legislation that would benefit Black communities, right? And so it said, like, it was basically saying like, well, here's another minority, they have been able to succeed in society, and able to achieve a certain socioeconomic status, right? What wasn't said or talked about, right, were the crazy immigration laws that really shaped what the diaspora from Asia and the Asian communities looked like, right? Because you talk about some of the most intense immigration legislation ever in our country, started with the, Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. Basically, after like all the railroads, after like our entire infrastructure was created, largely by like, people of color, but Chinese communities, Japanese communities, then it's like, okay, we're done with that. And we're also done with you.
Yeah, and we don't want you to bring your families.
Yes, and
because
you can't bring your family over. It was only men, right? So families couldn't come over. And like, and then after that, the immigration laws that did kind of open up, like were only like professionals, like folks with higher level degrees,
Skills. Mhm.
right? Higher level skills, right? So it was racist immigration laws that then like, okay, the few folks that they were allowing, because there were quotas, right? And
Yeah.
the quotas gave precedent towards higher education, right? So you had folks that were already educated that were coming over that they were saying, well, why can't you move up in society? But they had already achieved a certain level of education, in their home countries. So it was kind of a setup from the beginning. And that's why it's a myth, because like none of it was real. It was literally a way to pit communities against each other, because then they're just doing this rather than looking at the system itself, right?
Yeah,
And so, and it's something that has perpetuated, right? And it's perpetuated. And I think that's something that's also being brought up by these is both the tension in these communities, right? The tension between the Asian and the Black communities, the tension between the Asian and the Latino communities, but also the solidarity, right? Like I think both of those things are also coming up right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that model minority myth was quite apparent with regard to loans being approved and denied, mortgages being approved and denied. So the model minority would get them, and the other people of color weren't, because they didn't meet the same criteria. So preference was given to the model minorities. And so that's why you see what has happened is different Asian Pacific Islander groups do business in areas that are predominantly dominated by African Americans. African Americans don't own businesses there because they couldn't get the funding. And so you have that. And so there's that undercurrent that exists. Wow, we have to buy from them because they are the business owners here. So that resentment is there. Even though if you don't want to go out of your community to shop, then you will shop there. And so that undergirding is always there. And so there's the potential for flare-ups. Like, remember the incident when
Compton,
California?
Oh my God, yeah.
I was there. And it's like,
wow.
I had to put a sign in my rental car saying not Korean.
Oh my God.
I was working for an oil company. And, and I appreciate you brought up the quota, because my grandfather in Malaysia, who started as a grave digger and then ended up in real estate, he got a letter from FDR saying no Chinaman could have this much money to send his children to the United States for education. So 3 of my 2 uncles and my mom were allowed to come in. So no one else from your family will be allowed into the United States for education. And so
that's because they were already educated.
No, they were getting they were educated, but they were under the British colony. But what happens? They were coming in for university. And, and the whole point with that is that too, think about how many people that are already established doctors and, and physicians and, and dentists, they come in to the United States, they have to they have to retest and get certified, even though they had a practice. So my cousin said, I'm a gastroenterologist that is, very well known in Asia. I'm not coming to the States.
Yeah, and that's one reason for entrepreneurship within Asian American communities, is because people weren't willing to go through the rigors to be qualified to do what they were doing in their countries, and were leaders in their fields. And they say, you know what, I'll just buy a business. I'll just buy a business. And so that's why you see a number of franchises are owned by Asian Americans because they had the wherewithal to do that, as opposed to be subject to, the scrutiny, the re-education to do something that they were already competent and proficient in.
Yeah. And a lot of the businesses were also closed. They were boarded up. So they're not taking over already open, established, successful businesses. Just a lot of, like in Compton, they were opening up because they were boarded up. And a lot of those immigrants that came from Asia opened up those businesses. And there was the tension. I appreciate you bringing the tension up, was because they didn't understand what civil rights activities were happening because they weren't in this country at that time. And so they're new immigrants. And then this is why their businesses were burned, was because it's like there was anger and the frustration of the competition is, the people were really encouraged to say, who's to blame for your socioeconomic situation? It's the model minority.
Right.
Yeah.
And recently the flu. I mean, with the COVID, there's been 149% increase in API hate crimes, even though overall, because of COVID, 7% decrease in overall crime in the country.
Wow, that's a fascinating statistic. Masando, I recall at the beginning of the pandemic, you did have an experience in a grocery store, did you not?
I don't know. I mean,
Were you telling me about that?
I don't know. I mean, there are microaggressions that happen to me daily.
Yeah.
That's something we all have in common.
Like, I don't even remember them anymore.
I remember just, in a grocery store, someone not wanting to, they were a cashier in a store and really preferred if you went to another line. And, again, it's a microaggression. And so,
yeah, because that that kind of thing during the pandemic, kind of being seen as like the carrier. That's definitely happened a few times, and it's weird and it's upsetting. But like I said, it feels honestly like, I don't know how it, like, always, like, there's always microaggressions of kind of weirdness that happen, right? Or people bowing to me, or there's just that kind of stuff happens all the time. And yeah, I mean, I think something else that this has brought up is, and something that Claire talked about, is it's often like, I feel like our story of just what it means to walk in an Asian body, through the world, in our country, it's often like stories that are not told, right? Or often just feel very invisible. I feel invisible in white spaces, and then I feel invisible in BIPOC spaces, right? And I think the model minority myth is something that helps to perpetuate that, right? Because I like try to find my space in justice circles, right? But often the conversations, aren't really reflective of my experience, right? Or it's always like the thing that like is kind of honestly feels like an aside. Like after we've done like the meat of talking about justice and how we're working together, then and that particular experience of what that is, and then like sort of the Asian experience is kind of, oh, we better throw that in at the end. If it is thrown in, so so we can acknowledge the couple folks in the room, right? Like, and so I think something that is coming to light is like a deeper understanding, right? A lot of folks are getting educated on the model minority myth right now. A lot of folks are getting educated on the history of anti-Asian discrimination, hate, and legislation that has happened in our country, right? A lot of folks are getting educated on, how communities have been being pit against each other. And like, to me, that is what's so important. And I have to look at the ways in which the particular kind of racism that I inherited from my family members, right? Because here's also what the model minority myth does, I think, to our psychology, or at least as what I've seen in my family. This myth that like our proximity to whiteness is good, right? Or like that we should continually strive to assimilate as much as we can so that our proximity to whiteness can get greater so that we can reap the benefits of that. And part of what that requires is to then distance ourselves, right? And to even help perpetuate anti-Black, racism, right? Like buying into that and buying into this whole, social construct of race and the ways that it shows up in our society. Like I saw that in my family, right? Like my dad grew up in 5 Points here in Colorado, which is a redlined community. His dad owned a store in that community. Like all of these things that you're talking about, like this is like exactly
Your story.
You're telling my family story, but he was kicked out of California, right? Like, so also was because of the Executive Order 9066, right? So my grandfather had to pack up everything in a week and come to Colorado because it was the one sanctuary state. But once he got here, the only place they were allowed to live was in that segregated community. And he had some family help from home to get a loan to buy that store. So, his parents, my dad's parents, like wouldn't even let some of, friends in the house, like some of his African-American friends in the house. Like, so that sort of construct of anti-Black racism, let's try to, become closer to whiteness, whether that's conscious or not, it perpetuates. And I think that's something I want to look at and continue to like look at with my other Asian AAPI folks, and like saying like, can we interrupt all of this? Like, how can we interrupt all of this within our community, and then how we're in solidarity with each other.
Which leads me to my next question, which is a great question. Do you think that cross-cultural coalitions can work?
Mhm. It has worked. Actually, historically, Asians and Blacks, if you look at Medium, had just reported some of the history of it. And part of us as people that are, marginalized groups need to stop code switching. We feel like we have to code switch to be seen, to fit in. And I think part of that is really educating ourselves and recognizing, yeah, I code switch. And, and the other thing too is then how can we start changing the system? Because I don't need any more allies. I don't want somebody to go to the march and buy the t-shirt, and it's like, yeah, I'm an ally. It's like, I want advocates. I want accomplices to change the story.
Yeah.
And, and I need to do that. I've been doing that myself. I've been posting, I'm getting, over 1,000, 2,000 views on a lot of my LinkedIn posts because I'm doing the educating on using that social media, because we're a blip. The AAPI information gets on for a day until, what happens? And, and I've talked to a lot of my other marginalized groups saying, okay, if those perpetrators in Atlanta and in Boulder, were they, if they were not white, would they have lived long enough to be handcuffed, to be put on a car? Just saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
And it's
So
so interesting how we people of color have so many commonalities. And then if we could just, like you said, kind of take a step back and recognize that, yeah, absolutely. I've been learning the code switch probably since I began to walk, right? So, and, to be able to fit in and to get opportunities and, to get ahead in life. And so if we could just continue to recognize that in all of us and, begin to just have that conversation, to get educated. It's, I mean, this is such a great conversation. And I mean, Michelle, thank you so much for our wonderful guests here today, Masando and Claire. I mean, you have educated me in just a short period of time, things that I just hadn't even thought about. And so I really appreciate that. And I appreciate the transparency and you all sharing, your feelings. It is quite humbling for me, even as a person of color. So I appreciate that. Thank you so
So
much.
thank you, Judy. I have one final question, and that is, Claire, what can individuals do? Masando, what can individuals do to take affirmative steps? Yes, instead of buying the t-shirt and showing up for the march. I mean, what can we do to begin to affect change at the systemic level? And we'll start with you, Masando.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think being in spaces where stories are able to be told is a really good first step, just in getting educated, and also getting educated from a point where empathy can actually occur and take place, right? Uh, I'm a If you're a person of color, like, get into some caucuses that are multiracial and multicultural from the beginning, that have the intention of sharing stories, of lamenting together and celebrating together, of learning with each other, learning from each other, but also willing through that to fight for each other, right? Like, recognizing the ways in which our experiences are similar, but can we be real about the ways in which they're different too, right? Like, I think that to me is really, really important sort of personal, interpersonal, life-changing thing, to put yourself intentionally in those spaces, or to, listen to conversations like this where these kinds of things are happening. But yeah, then through that, honestly, my advice always is start in the places where you already have influence. Start in your family, start in your work, start in your school, start in your neighborhood, right? And begin to notice the ways in which the model minority myth gets perpetuated in those spaces. Start to notice the ways in which these dynamics that we're talking about, these tensions that we're talking about, get perpetuated in those spaces, and then do things you can to shift and change that, right? Like, right in those places that you're already inhabiting. Like, so you don't have to go out, you don't have to become an activist, right? But like, you can start exactly where you are, and through your education, through your empathy building, through the movement of your own heart that says, like, I'm not doing this because it's the right thing to do necessarily only. I'm doing this because I've been moved enough to know that, like, if I don't do something, right, like, something will happen in me to say, like, no, you have to go and do this because of your love, right? Your love for one another, your love for yourself. So that's always my suggestion, is just right where you're at, you can start to create systemic change.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That reminds me of a quote by Arthur Ashe. Do what you can, wherever you can, whenever you can.
Yes.
Claire.
Yeah, and that's a great segue, because a lot of the API organizations are also giving free bystander intervention training. Hollaback, I took that, and it was great, because how do I step in from a safety standpoint? Can I distract it? Can I document? Can I, thank goodness for documentation with, George Floyd, and with, Breonna Taylor, and, and all the, and what's been happening with all of our elders, because unless you see it, you don't know about it. And again, we're not on the radar. The other thing too is then self-care is not selfish. Make sure that you're taking care of yourself. If you're always giving out but not taking care of yourself, then how are you going to help other folks? And and part of that is also connecting, really listening with your heart, being very empathetic, being very zen, to say, what is the person really messaging to you, and give that space. Because a lot of the Asians, we're breaking out of our culture to share what we're feeling, but give us that space to actually share it. And don't compare it. This is like the discrimination, Olympics. Well, you didn't suffer as much as I did. I've been hearing that from a lot of my colleagues who are going through school. You and Michelle, you and Jody, and this, you've all heard that. No, you didn't suffer as much as I did, and it's like, but no, we need to really mitigate the suffering and really change the story and the system, and getting, even with this API hate bill, that cost the company, the government nothing, but yet it wasn't passed by over 200 people that were saying, no, we don't want to label it, because otherwise, if it happens, then it's a hate crime. And we don't want to stop the API hate, because then we'll have to do something about it instead of letting them go back home. So these are some of the things we can do. And I encourage everyone and myself, we need to step up, speak out. I did a lay sermon at my church, and, and it's scary. It's not easy. But the thing is that, what is the reward is that it'll really help humanity and really sharing that love. We talk about love. Are we really doing it? And so thank you for that question.
Yeah.
You're so welcome. And Jody, I'm going to let you close out.
I just want to, once again, thank you both, Claire and Masando, for joining us today. This has been extremely enlightening, and I hope that our audience that will view this video will take, what you shared with us, take it in, digest it, and, begin to, make a change. Even if, like Masando said, right there in your family, affect those right there within your circle. You don't have to, go out to the rallies and marches, but just have those courageous conversations within your own circle. Be transparent about your ignorance, become educated, because, unless you're willing to be a little bit vulnerable and be honest and truthful about, what you know or what you don't know, and just be bold enough, courageous enough to take those steps. And so I thank you once again, wholeheartedly, for joining us today. This was just very important. And I hope, those again watching will learn something from today. So thank you both. And, perhaps you can join us again in the future. We would love that. We would absolutely love to continue this conversation. It is so very important. Michelle, thank you once again for being here today. And as we close out, I want to wish everyone well. If you celebrate Easter, have a wonderful Easter as well.
And remember, injustice anywhere threatens justice everywhere. So thank you again for tuning in to HR Masters Wine and Wisdom.